converge. When all that's fair and fine seems lost, three heroes will emerge. Ba 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 da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba da da ba da ba da. Waka waka waka! It's Lou and Max and
Hello.
Rich.
All right. So today's topic out of Starlog Magazine number 66 from January 1983, we're going to talk about not the Muppets, but the Muppets creators movie, The Dark Crystal.
More 80s fantasy.
We love the 80s.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
that weird period, right, where they just don't make. I think we talked about it a little bit before on some of the other episodes where they just don't make fantasy films like this anymore. I mean, you have your Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, but the 80s they really made a lot of different fantasy movies. Krull and Conan and
If you
Labyrinth and
leave
things
out
along those
Beastmaster,
lines.
I'm going to be very upset. Do not
And
forget the
Beastmaster,
Beastmaster.
yeah.
Right. Right. Well, and it's interesting because in this article, I mean, you're talking about, um, the co-producer, Gary Kurtz, was talking about fantasy film and also science fiction about how it was kind of even then they sort of had a little bit of a negative connotation. Some people just didn't understand. They're thinking fantasy, um, as like fairy tales or something, some kids stuff. But and so breaking through those barriers like they did with Star Wars and like they did with ET, and then later on all of a sudden, hey, people are digging this, so let's do this. So when you see all the different things that people did, copying Star Wars and some of the other stuff that followed, Dark Crystal, for example, for me, I mean, I like to back the Dark Crystal and Labyrinth,
Yeah,
those two movies together.
both Henson. I mean, that was
Right.
Jim Henson's thing, right? People think of Jim Henson as the Muppets, but the Muppets was a very adult show, and he never talked down to kids, even on Sesame Street when he did the Muppets, and he always wanted to do kind of puppets for adults. I don't know if you guys remember if you're old enough, but there were Muppets on the original Saturday Night Live when it first premiered. He had
Hmm.
Muppet characters that would appear every once in a while. I forget what they called them because I remember watching the repeats when I was a kid when they would show some of the repeats of the original Saturday Night Live, and there were like kind of crude Muppets on there doing like that adult style humor.
Did you
And
see?
Okay.
Are you talking about Meet the Feebles? Did you see that?
something along those lines, yeah, but not as
That wasn't
awful as
quite
that.
Jim
Like,
Henson, but that was
Not
Peter
not
Jackson.
Fraggles.
That was Peter
right.
Jackson from Lord of the Rings. So yeah, Meet
But
the
yeah, I
Feebles.
mean,
Well,
this was, I think it said in the article too that this was the first, supposedly, this was the first film that was entirely puppets, like no human beings in it at all.
right. Right. Yeah. I mean, there were other movies, like E.T., where you had the puppetry interacting with humans, and they were saying that it was easier to kind of do that than what they were trying to do here because you can't cut away, quite as easy. And with this, not only were the characters all you know controlled by puppeteers, but also the all the scenery. Like you had plants and you had
Yeah.
the little animals and all the background. When they were talking originally, they were mountains that talk and trees that walk and all of that stuff. Some of that got cut back a little bit, but still, if you when you as you watch the movie, you see this whole world that was created, and it's all done in puppetry, and it
Right.
was pretty
Very
interesting.
elaborate.
So something that was not ever done before.
Yeah.
And there's no, I mean, nobody else probably could have done it at that time any better, besides Jim Henson and Frank Oz. I mean, Frank Oz was the co-director with Jim Henson, and Oz is a longtime puppeteer, and a big part, probably maybe not as famous as Henson, but as big a part with the Muppets and all of that. And a lot of his puppetry is here. He did a lot of the voices
Oh yeah,
He did
for the
Yoda
Muppets and stuff.
yeah.
Star
Frank
Wars.
Oz
Yeah,
was Yoda. Yep.
He was Yoda.
Yeah,
yeah,
and
he
he's
did. He
a
did it.
director in his own right too. He directed a lot of films
Correct.
later on, a lot of comedies and things along those lines. But he became kind of
Yeah.
a big time director also. Yeah, it's an interesting film because it was Jim Henson trying to go big. I think it was backed by a British company, ITC Features, which was out of England, and the Muppets were huge, huge in England. You ever met people from England? They love. I mean, we love the Muppets here, but I guess it was phenomenal in England. Like people went crazy for it. There's even longer episodes in England than they have here in the U.S. And it was just one of those strange movies. It was behind the times and ahead of the times. Like it would have made massive money if it was made in the late '60s to go to college students
Mhm.
and potheads and stuff like that.
Sure.
And then it kind of hit in the '80s when that fantasy, that fascination with fantasy was still around, but there just wasn't the audience there for it. It was too scary for little kids, supposedly, or at least parents felt it was too scary for little kids. And what I thought was kind of interesting is in the article, I think it was in the article, or maybe I read this somewhere else, was Jim Henson was quoted as saying, "Well, it's okay, kids should be afraid once in a while, and that's why I like to make movies like this. I wanted to do something that wasn't talking down to kids. It's okay to be afraid and to be scared, but ultimately, at the end of the story, they're going to come out okay. There's that sort of Joseph Campbell, the power of myth, being evoked in this film, like all those fantasy films in the '80s.
Oh yeah, and it's the yeah, some of the imagery. I mean, I just recently watched the movie again as we knew we were going to be doing this, and it has been I mean, it's been a long time. I probably haven't seen it for quite a while. So as I'm watching it again, I'm thinking to myself that yeah, I don't know. I mean, that kids would really I could see where this might bring some nightmares because of some of the
Yeah.
imagery. I mean, not that the story itself is terribly, gruesome or scary, but it's a really weird psychedelic kind of freakish puppetry that's going on in the characters, that were created, by Brian Frood. I mean, it's just the whole world there completely different,
Yeah, and that's why I
frenzied
said
with things.
it would have fit right in, midnight movies in the '60s or on college
Sure.
campuses or things like that with the Tolkien fans, or it might have done better
Oh
after,
yeah,
the Lord of the Rings stuff came out.
Lord of the Rings.
And it was
Yeah.
a Christmas movie too. So it was kind of, and I think they probably marketed it. It's Jim Henson, it's the Muppets, it's fantasy, and I think
Take
people
your
went.
2-year, 3-year-olds.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think people went thinking they were gonna see like like you said, Max, like an ET style movie or a Disney style feature. And the problem you always have with these fantasy films is bringing people into this world and making them believe it. So
Hmm.
say for Tolkien, if you haven't read the books, sometimes that can be dense to get into those films or any of that stuff. And it's just, I mean, from what I remember this movie, even when I try and watch it now, I find it kind of dense to get into the movie and figure out what's going on. And also with sort of the weird voices, the way they're talking and stuff like that. I'm like, I found it hard to follow the first time I watched it.
Well, and it's interesting because they talked about the languages and stuff. You remember the pod people where
Yeah.
they had in that movie. So as they were creating, they're talking about how when they were first talking about creating them, that they kind of wanted to make them like potato head guys and put their eyes all over.
Right.
But they settled and changed and decided they didn't want to make that gruesome. But they also talked about how they created languages specific for these, for some of each of these different clans of people, and one of
Right.
them they was a mixture of Serbian and Croatian. And when they first filmed or opened this up for like an early release for like review, Some people didn't get where they had some stuff that was kind of this mixed Egyptian thing, or where
Right.
it wasn't anything in English, but all of the storyline stuff you were able to follow through the visuals. But people didn't like that, so they changed that and kind of made these some of the stuff in English, but they still kept those pod people, speaking that weird language that had to be translated by somebody who spoke both the English and the this made up language, really.
I just started
Yeah.
watching it again tonight. It is bizarre even watching the beginning of the film, like when they're kind of gathered around the crystal, and there's the
Mhm.
narrator gives a little bit, and then they're all being hit by this light, and I guess a little bit into the film they see is it the Gelfling running around,
Right.
and the creatures, to me, I always thought the creatures were just buzzards, but even look in the article,
Mhm.
he's like, well, they were supposed to be this, then they kind of developed in that, and then they can look, and to me, they kind of look like buzzards and crabs, when they went after the Gelflings, which look like something out of the Lord
Mhm.
of the Rings to me. But yeah, it is a
Right.
little weird to follow, to be honest with you. I think you watch it a few times, you get a better thing. But I guess if you're going to the movies, you're taking your kids thinking you're going to see a Muppet movie, and you see this, it was beyond Sesame Street. It was definitely more detailed. They put
And I
more,
don't
Correct.
know how engaging it would be for kids. Like, I think I tried to show it to
Right.
my daughter because the Netflix series was on, so I'm like, "Oh, we should watch the original first so we know," and
right.
she was bored like 10, 15 minutes in
Sure.
It is a
because
hard
it was
watch.
very difficult to figure, not that she didn't like the puppets or the effects or anything like that, but it was just it's kind of a dense mythology, dense story,
Yeah.
and I don't know, I mean, it's great what they tried. Like, it was a fantastic experiment, and that it's amazing, like you said, Max, like that the it's all and that's why I love practical effects over CGI. It's all everything there is
Yeah.
real.
The
The
hours
puppets,
to put the
yeah,
costumes together and to
right.
carve and to glue and to design, and oh man.
And it's probably one I have to revisit because it's never really spoken to me, or I've gotten into it. There are some of those films that are classics or cult classics that I try and watch, and I just, for some reason, they never speak to me, or I don't get into it. One of them is Back to the Future. I don't know why. I don't like that movie.
I
I
have to
can't
admit, I
stand
don't
it.
like those movies either. Everybody
Yeah,
loves it, and I'm like,
yeah.
I don't get it. It doesn't.
Everybody's crazy for those, and I'm just like,
Nope.
it doesn't speak to me. It didn't speak to me at the time. It doesn't speak to me now. It's like,
I don't get it. The night, I'm sure it was a great film. The DeLorean's a cool car. I get
right.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it just isn't for me.
Well, and it's funny because before I saw the Dark Crystal the first time, and that would have been back in the '80s, and it was probably back while I was stationed in Greece, and we watched everything, on
Right.
VHS. I This really wasn't my vein either, but it kind of hooked me, something about it, and like I said, and for me, I'd love to follow this one up with Labyrinth.
Yeah.
So
I like
um,
I'd say
you know,
we should do a triple feature because the 3 films that came out in the '80s that were fantasy films that didn't do well and became cult classics were this, Labyrinth. I don't know how successful that was, but the other one is, have you ever seen Return to Oz, which is not a Muppet movie? It was done by Disney. That is a fantastic film. My daughter and I used to watch that all the
Better than
time.
Island at the Top of the World, Rich?
Probably better than Island
Possibly.
at the Top of the
Oh
World.
wow,
But
jeez.
but again, it was one of those ones, it was too dark for kids, and I love Labyrinth, Max. I like that movie a
mm,
lot. I think that's a fantastic
yeah.
one. I mean,
Yeah, and I think
that's a
that's
great
probably
one.
going to be something else I'm going to have to revisit here sooner rather than later. You know,
I know you like to watch it strictly for David Bowie's codpiece, Max.
David, I'm not going to lie to you. I am a big fan of David Bowie. Um, there was a there was a there was a time that I liked the spiked up hair, and I worked in a foundry, so it looked like I had eyeliner on in the '70s because of the soot and smoke that I couldn't get out of my eyes. So yeah, so I kind of had that David Bowie look kind of going on. Now,
Sp-
nowhere near the success, but at least kind of the look.
Speaking of time, it's about that time, isn't it?
It is.
Ground control to Major Max. Our time is up and we've got to be signing off.
Oh my god, too funny.
All right. Well, I am Max Overnighter. Thanks for listening.
Maximus.
You can catch Max on his lives on Migo Like. They appear whenever.
Like 12
Surprises when he
times a
gets
day.
mail, whenever he gets a new collection, he just pops up and
Why do
does
you think
a
I keep
live.
sending Max stuff? So he'll just keep doing lives. Just keep sending him shit in the mail. He's gonna start opening. He's like, "What is
That's his
this?
trick. He's
An old
figured it out. He's
Kleenex
like,
box? What is
I do these
this?
lives, people send me shit.
A roll of paper towels." I am Lou Malagrana. You can find me on Migo Like on Facebook with Max doing lives. You can find me on YouTube doing lives under My Migo Like, and you can, yeah, that's pretty much it, I think.
I am Rich Hurley, also known as Dr. Durant. You can find me on YouTube at Dr. Durant Sanctum, where I put together little videos talking about comic books, toys, movies, what have you. And as a matter of fact, my last episode was about Famous Monsters of Filmland. And the very last issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland had the Dark Crystal on the cover.
There we go. All
There
right,
you
gentlemen,
go.
I think it's time we get out of here and on to the next big thing.
Ground control to Major Max. Ground control. Ground control!
We have
Would you
to let
come in, Max, for God's sake?
All right, we're out.
What?
Shutting down. Good night, everyone.